Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. The other day, I discussed on this platform the um, the story behind this photograph. Some of you not familiar. The gentleman is wearing a ZANU PF cap, and the caption at the bottom is write an essay on what you see in the picture, and don't forget chicken in. What the individual was referring to there is that during last year's election, President Emerson Mnangagwa, as PF, spent millions of dollars buying chicken in and chips to for the rural voters who were bussed to attend the party's rallies and then frog marched to vote on voting day. I said then, and I'll say it again, these rural voters are victims of what is happening in Zimbabwe. And somehow to keep on blaming them as the ones who are responsible for keeping ZANU PF in power is to completely miss the point. I repeat, the rural voters are the victims. They are not the defenders of the regime. Here is a video clip of somebody, Margaret Dongo, herself a former ZANU PF steward, speaking exactly what I'm talking about here, of how the rural voters are victims.
They have wrong priorities, especially the current government. How can you go and build an airport which services a few people, and the majority are the elite and the so-called investors? Look at the rural. I made you come to interview me because I wanted you to have the experience of the roads that we are using. If we go today to our hospital there, you feel pity with that's a hospital in a rural area. If we go to our clinic, you feel pity. We have no piped water here. Do you know the reason why the rural people vote for ZANU PF? One, they're intimidated. Two, the policy is that the rural people should remain poor and subservient to the government. They should remain poor because if they remain poor, they continue singing the song for their master. This is why these people have been impoverished. It's for a reason. Because at the moment, if you economic empower these people, they'll go out of hand. ZANU PF will never have control over them.
If one accepts that political reality, that the rural voters are the victims, they are being held to ransom by the regime, then how can you come and then say that the gentleman there is a politician's defender? Do they have a choice? Have they ever had a choice? In Zimbabwe's 44 years of independence, have the rural voters ever had a meaningful vote, a meaningful say in the governance of the country? The answer is no. I think some of the analysis that we are getting from some of the Zimbabweans is completely misleading. And hence the reason why the country is failing to come up with a solution. Yes, Zimbabwe is a failed state. Yes, one can say that we are responsible. We, the people, are responsible for our sorry state. That I totally agree with. But we have got to be careful on who we are going to blame for Zimbabwe's economic uh, demise and political mess. The Greeks, to whom humanity owes democracy, were right. The Greeks said a government of the people, by the people, for the people is only possible if the people are educated, knowledgeable, and diligent. I think it is no exaggeration that ZANU-PF has never wanted the rural people to be educated. These people live in fear of the regime. They are denied the one thing that could free them, the title deeds to land. And without that, they're economically impoverished and politically denied of any meaningful power. If we are going to be honest about why Zimbabwe is a failed state, we cannot blame the rural for that. It is well known that last year, Emerson Mnangagwa himself boasted that ZANU-PF was going to frog march the rural voters with the village head at the head, the people in the middle, and the ZANU-PF chairperson at the back. Frog march them to the polling station. And he boasted that the party would know how each of the voters voted. Tisingazikanwi rufu, he said. Vanovhota tinoziva kuti mabva kupi. Of course, he was right. Ever since 2008, the ZANU-PF has increased the number of polling stations in each constituency from 10 in 2008 and changed from constituency voters for to a polling station voters for. And the number of polling stations in each constituency last year was about 54. And with now a polling station voters roll, you cannot go and vote anywhere else. You have got to go to that polling station. The votes are counted at that polling station. So if 500 people voted, the party officials would have seen those 500 people has walked in, and from their own records, they could come up with a rough guesstimate of how each one of those voters who goes in would vote. And so within 30 minutes of the polling station results being posted, they will be able to come up with their own list of who voted for the party and who did not. And so this idea that somehow your vote is your secret is just a nonsense. And more so in the rural area, where if you are found to be on the wrong list, you could be asked to move. You would be ostracized over and over again. This year, for instance, millions of Zimbabweans in the rural areas are facing hunger. There was a drought last year, so the harvest was very poor. And donors may contribute towards drought relief for the country. But the party insists that it and its officials will be responsible for distributing the food. And it is no secret that ZANU-PF has in the past distributed state aid, foreign aid, whatever, on the basis of party card holders. And party officials are responsible for the distribution. There can be no doubt that Margaret Longo was right. The rural voters are being deliberately kept poor, ignorant for political reasons. If we are serious about who is responsible for Zimbabwe, for defending the politicians, then we've got to look at the urban voters, particularly those in the leafy suburbs, such as Borodale, Mount Pleasant, and other low-density suburbs countrywide. They were conned last year into participating in Zimbabwe's flawed elections. An election process which David Coulthard, in his book, admitted was so flawed, so illegal, that the only logical step was to withdraw. That was in 2018. No meaningful reforms were implemented in 2018. And yet, Zimbabweans in the urban centers participated in those flawed elections again. Talking of the Greeks saying that the electorate should be educated and knowledgeable. I think in this day and age, it is not too much to expect that some of those urban voters should be educated, should be knowledgeable of what is going on here. And yet, they were not. They participated in these flawed elections in their millions. Last year, Chamisa got no fewer than nearly 2 million votes, according to ZEC's result. And one can count on 3 to 4 million, at least, in the diaspora, who cheered and applauded the participation in these flawed elections. It's not too much to ask that somebody in this day and age should be knowledgeable about how flawed the process is in Zimbabwe. And yet, they participated. They were conned by Chamisa into believing that he had plugged all the vote-rigging loopholes. Triple C would win big, and they believed him. They believed him in their millions. And some even believe him now, even now, with the benefit of hindsight. And some of those who believe Chamisa are the ones who are coming up with this, what I can only call idiotic posts, where they single out the row of voters and blame them for defending politicians. These people have no power at all to do so. Yes, of course, there are some ZANU-PF officials. One cannot deny should know better. But this is the reality about our politics in Zimbabwe. Both Mnangagwa and ZANU-PF before him, they've never had any problems whatsoever recruiting some of Zimbabwe's intellectuals to join ZANU-PF or to do the party's dirty work or to clean it up afterwards. Never. It is no secret, of course, that last year alone, Mnangagwa must have spent at least 5 billion US dollars in bribing various peoples at various levels. Yes, we can start with the rural poor who received the chicken and chips at the ZANU-PF rallies. And they were passed from one rally to another. That has costed millions. But that story of bribery started in November last year, when Emerson Mnangagwa bribed Zimbabwe's politicians, MPs, and senators. They all received a whopping 40,000 US dollars in November. He called it a housing loan. Everybody knew it was a bribe. A housing loan. Some of those MPs knew that within 6 months there'll be new elections and they may not win and they'll become unemployed. So how the hell were they expected to pay the loan these generous loans. Of course, they were not going to repay it. But there was also a reason why they were paid so early. They were paid in November. The MPs and senators, they got 40,000 US dollars housing loan. Deputy ministers, 230,000. That's for the ministers themselves, 500,000 each. This was buying their silence. Mnangagwa did not want parliament and senators to start asking awkward questions about what he was about to do. The bribes he was going to pay off in the coming months as the country moved into the election mode. And he was right. He did buy their silence. What was to follow was, yes, the rural folks particularly being passed from one rally to another, and they were all being fed. The party would buy them soft drinks. Where was all this money coming from? Nobody dared to ask. The chiefs and headmen were each bribed with twin cab trucks for the chiefs and motorcycles for the headmen. They were expected to play the role of the ZANU-PF political commissars in all but name. Church leaders, some were paid farms and motor vehicles, others just motor vehicles, depending on how Mnangagwa rated them. And their task was to mobilize their church followers to vote for ZANU-PF. Other groups, other leaders in other organs who played similar roles were similarly rewarded. Magistrates and judges were to play a very pivotal role in the elections. And so they were paid on a sliding scale, with the judges getting as much as 400,000 US dollars housing loan. They never repaid it. No one expected them to repay it. Their role was to turn a blind eye to the flaws and the illegalities in the process, in the election that was taking place. And they did. The number one thing was they all pretended to not notice that the ZEC had failed to produce a verified voters roll. The nomination day came and magistrates presided over that. They knew because it had been in the public media all along that ZEC had failed to produce a verified roll. And the law was very clear that nomination, ZEC should produce a verified voters roll at least one calendar month before nomination day. But here we are. These guys we're going through the nomination with no verified voters roll. And the magistrate, right up to the judges, turned a blind eye to it. ZEC officials themselves were paid 230,000, depending on their position. And of course, they were the beneficiary of the various dodgy contracts that ZEC dished out with suppliers like our friend Wikivayo, where a computer server worth 50,000 US dollars was paid for 1.2 million US dollars was paid for it. They, without doubt, pocketed some of the money as well in the brown envelopes and so forth. The level of bribery in Zimbabwe has become unbelievable. This is what has kept ZANU-PF in office. And so therefore, then when you are talking about we are all responsible for defending the politicians, I think we have got enough data to be able to pick who among the Zimbabweans are responsible. We should not forget, of course, the opposition itself. Ever since the 2008 to 2013 GNU, ZANU-PF has learned that the opposition would do whatever the party wants them to do once they've been bribed. And Mugabe bribed Morgan Tsvangirai and company in 2008 to 2013 during the GNU with the trappings of high office. The MDC guys forgot about reforms. And ever since, the MDC, Triple C have been participating in these flawed elections to give ZANU-PF legitimacy. It is no exaggeration, therefore, to say MDC, Triple C have been ZANU-PF Team B in all but name. That is the reality. And I think that is the reality that we've got to deal with if we are serious about getting Zimbabwe out of this mess. Blaming the victims, the rural people, for instance, is to completely miss the point. I was just going to close there. I think most of you have managed to read the comment there. I'll just read the last part of it. I wish you could also endeavor to broadcast that even the most rural can hear you. Well, I think the task of educating the voters is important. But I think in the case of the rural people, it's not so much the education that is required. It is freeing them from their taskmasters, ZANU-PF. ZANU-PF is holding the rural people to ransom. That is a fact that we must acknowledge and deal with. And I believe the one thing we can do for the rural people is to demand that the people in the rural areas should be given title deeds. You give the people in the rural area the title deeds. They do not want your charity. Give them the title deeds, the confidence that they own the piece of land on which their homestead is built. I believe they will have the confidence to build themselves a decent homestead. They will be able to look after the land and be economically independent to the point where giving them the vote would be the next logical thing. As long as ANOPF is holding the rural people to ransom, I don't think educating them can free them. Right now, you can envisage ZANU-PF thugs have their big foot on the neck of the rural peasants. And you have to take off that foot from their neck first. That will be the number one thing that one needs to do before educating them about their right to a meaningful vote. Indeed, the opposition have not done the rural people any favors at all, pretending that the rural people have got a meaningful vote, insisting, in fact, in some cases, that their vote is secret, when everybody can see that it is not. The rural people did not need to be educated on that one. They can see it for themselves. It's not, I think the biggest problem we have in Zimbabwe is this tendency to generalize, and in some cases even pick the victims and blame them for the country's problems, particularly blaming the rural peasants for Zimbabwe's political paralysis and economic meltdown. It is completely the wrong thing. We don't want to point the fingers at the real people who are responsible for it. I don't see how anyone in the leafy suburbs of Borodale, Mount Pleasant, could justify their participating in last year's elections because they believed Chamisa's nonsensical claim that he had plugged all the vote-rigging loopholes. Were they that stupid not to know that there was no verified voters roll? Clearly they were. Those are the people whom we should educate. The millions in the diaspora who were cheering and applauding, those are the people we should educate. They have absolutely no excuse for participating in those flawed elections, and yet they are the ones who cheered. They are the ones who are coming up with all these change radio announcements, trying to convince the rural people and everybody in the country that Triple C was going to win. When, of course, they knew that was just a lie. Thank you very much for joining me today, and hope you'll be able to join us again at 7 o'clock UK time or 8 o'clock Zimbabwe time. Have a good day.